of starving the people of North Korea to death to change their behavior. And so we don't have a lot of room left here to apply pressure to change their behavior.
It now needs to be followed up with diplomacy, where we get China and the United States working with the same strategy with North Korea to find a way that we can ease the tension and get North Korea to change direction.
On that note, let's bring in our panel. Tom Rogan, commentary writer for the Washington Examiner, A.B. Stoddard, associate editor at Real Clear Politics and host of No Labels Radio on Sirius XM, and Michael Needham is the chief executive officer at Heritage Action for America. Welcome. Hope you guys all had a very Merry Christmas.
Absolutely. Merry Christmas.
So, Mike, thoughts on where we are with North Korea after hearing a sampling of that sound right there?
Yeah, well, you know, we've known all year, we've known for a long time there's not a lot of good options. I think it's a little bit misleading to say there's no more options for the United States to play economically. I mean, actually, the real economic options that we've had with North Korea always involve secondary sanctions. That means going after other entities that are doing business with North Koreans. The chairman of the House Armed Services Committee, Foreign Affairs Committee, Ed Royce, has given the administration a list of 12 Chinese banks that we should be putting secondary sanctions on. I think if you really want to put true kind of economic pressure on the North Koreans, the type that we had on Iran for a long time, you're going to have to look at those secondary sanctions. We're going to have to look at Chinese banks, especially those 12 that Chairman Royce has put forward.
On some new sanctions, Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin saying, quote, Treasury is targeting leaders of North Korea's ballistic missiles program as part of our maximum pressure campaign to isolate the DPRK and achieve a fully denuclearized Korean peninsula. A.B., your thoughts on this latest step from the Trump administration?
You know, the Trump administration deserves credit for getting the Chinese to do more with regards to North Korea than its predecessors. One of the things it did was convince the Chinese government to stop all transactions to their central bank with the regime. This is a lot of the things that we've seen look really effective and could be consequential, but we don't know how enforceable they are. So today, the Treasury Secretary said this is part of the goal for a denuclearized peninsula. That's not the Chinese's goal. That's not China's intention. They help us a little, but they still hold the most influence. So we're in a situation where they can take what look like dramatic steps, and many of them can be effective. But at the end, there are ways for the North Koreans to proceed with getting their hands on energy, proceeding with a nuclear program with not only the Chinese but other countries, which we can't prevent and we can't enforce.
It can also be tricky trying to figure out the intentions of the North Korean regime. Here's the White House on that idea.
How they operate is often a little mysterious. If we knew better with perfect knowledge, we would be able to address the North Korean problem with more clarity. And part of the larger strategy of increased pressure on North Koreans is to get them to change that behavior.
Tom, changing the behavior?
Well, I think Bossert and Senator Cardin, the Maryland Democrat, are both wrong on this because, as Michael suggests, we have not pushed the Chinese. This will not change until you push the Chinese, because the Chinese expectation, Senator Cardin obviously doesn't seem to get. I don't know what he's doing on the Foreign Relations Committee because it's quite basic. The Chinese want the United States in a position of relative weakness and discomfort in the region. North Korea at the moment is not such a big deal for them because they could. What's the harm if there's a war, refugees come across the border? The Chinese, as we've seen in Tiananmen and going forwards, Hong Kong, don't have a terrible disposition in terms of concern about those issues. So for the United States to, yes, I think we have to do those banking sanctions. Frankly, I think we also have to do the kind of thing that we've slightly done on counterterrorism, which is to bring down bank servers that act as cutouts, mess around with them, that covert action side. And finally, on the Chinese factor as well, the Trump administration needs to really double down in terms of a force presence in the South and East China Seas. Get in the Chinese neighborhood and say, listen, in the end, we may not be able to resolve this. You may not play ball with us, but by goodness, you are going to be paying a consequence, a price tag as well as us.
There's also concern about this economic surge perhaps coming in Asia and whether the Chinese will ultimately have the biggest economy in the world. What about that, Tom?
Well, I think part of this is India is the critical node here, and the Indian government is deeply concerned about the pressure there. Prime Minister Modi, obviously pro-American, pro-business reform, the world's most populous democracy. The Trump administration should get right alongside him. Trump should go to New Delhi, quite frankly, and say this is our anchor point. What Trump should also be doing, I think, and my accent aside, is going on Twitter and saying, Prime Minister David Cameron, the British government, close American allies who are dealing with Chinese financial entities, the Asia Investment and Infrastructure Bank, which former Prime Minister David Cameron just joined, they should not be doing that. That's poor, that's bad allyship.
Of course, we've heard the president talk a lot this year about China. Let's take a listen to this.
My administration is committed to improving our trade and business relationships with China. Both the United States and China will have a more prosperous future if we can achieve a level economic playing field. Right now, unfortunately, it is a very one-sided and unfair one.
So, AB, the president, a former businessman, has his concerns about the Chinese economy going forward and their business practices.
Going back decades, and it's one of the strongest themes of his economic message in his campaign was going after the Chinese. He has not followed through on those threats like the steel tariffs and things he's talked about because he's in a weakened position because of North Korea. So while they should have confronted the Chinese in the South China Seas, they've let it go. A whole year's gone by where development continues apace. And they obviously have benefited on the global stage economically as a leader, a global economic leader, because of our withdrawal from the Trans-Pacific Partnership. So while the president talks a lot about this reciprocity and the balance that we need to counter a rising China, because of our dependence on them in the situation with North Korea, he hasn't followed through on his threats.
Michael, looking ahead to China in the new year, are you looking for a new approach from the administration or more of the same?
Well, the most interesting thing actually is reading the national security strategy the administration just put out and seeing the contrast between the Chinese approach, which they call their One Belt, One Road approach. It's a massive, centrally planned Chinese plan for 68 countries in kind of from Europe all the way to the Pacific, versus what the United States offers, what Free Enterprise offers, where the administration talks about partnerships and countries coming to America, joining us in things like the Quad, which Tom mentioned, India, Australia, Japan, and the United States, voluntary relationships where we all benefit. I think that's what the future is. That's what people are looking for, not a centrally governed Chinese One Belt, One Road approach.
All right, we'll leave it there. The longest-serving Republican senator in U.S. history is getting a not-so-friendly push out the door tonight. Utah's largest newspaper is calling for Orrin Hatch to retire at the end of his current term. Correspondent Ellison Barber tells us why and how Hatch is reacting.
A Christmas Day tweet from Utah Senator Orrin Hatch with a photo of the Salt Lake Tribune showing Hatch as Utahn of the Year. The tweet said, quote, "Grateful for this great Christmas honor from the Salt Lake Tribune." It's a label the Salt Lake Tribune says has, quote, "everything to do with recognizing his utter lack of integrity that rises from his unquenchable thirst for power."
I've come to Utah to take a very historic action.
The paper criticized Hatch for his role in shrinking the size of 2 national monuments in Utah, calling the move anti-environmental, anti-Native American, and anti-business. The Tribune's editorial writers added it's time for Hatch to go. After all, they say he did what he said he always wanted to do, tax reform. Adding, Hatch, as chairman of the Senate Finance Committee, has his fingerprints all over it. Perhaps the most significant move of Hatch's career is the one that should, if there is any justice, end it. Hatch didn't mention any of that on Twitter. The senator's spokesperson said the tweet was sarcastic and in a statement added, "We all sincerely hope the members of the Salt Lake Tribune editorial board find joy this holiday season in something beyond baselessly attacking the service and integrity of someone who's given 40 years for the people of Utah just to satisfy their unquenchable thirst for clicks."
Senator Hatch, will you run again? Are you considering running again?
In early December, President Trump visited Utah.
Thank you to a very special man, Orrin Hatch, for the introduction. He's a fighter. We hope you will continue to serve your state and your country in the Senate for a very long time to come.
Less than 2 weeks later, Hatch talked about his future on Special Report.
Well, I've said that I intend to run again. I'll probably announce this sometime after the first 2 years, just exactly what I'm going to do.
Waiting in the wings is former Republican presidential candidate Mitt Romney and his reported interest in running for Hatch's seat, a prospect the senator would embrace.
You think Mitt Romney has a political future?
I sure do, and you know, if I didn't run, I would love to see him run in my place, and it would be good wherever he serves, because he's a straight shooter, a really wonderful fellow.
Someone who would be less than enthusiastic about Mitt Romney in the Senate is probably President Trump. Romney has criticized Trump for supporting Roy Moore and blasted the president's response to Charlottesville. Mike?
A topic we will cover with the panel. Ellison Barber here in Washington. Ellison, thanks a lot. We are awaiting word any day now on whether the Justice Department will ask